Hello there. This is your host, Jim Jennings, at the High Diddle Griddle Restaurant, introducing the delightful music of the Paul Lester Group. We have Lyle Laurent at the piano, our guitarist, Ray Gunter, on bass, Bob Osowski, then, of course, our multi-instrumentalist, Paul Lester.
Hello everyone, you can hear me at the back? Yep. Okay, so we're discussing mapping Auckland's historic music venues today. I thought I'd start off by talking about how I got the idea. Oh, great. This first image is of the Maori Community Centre, but the venue that actually gave me this idea was Montmartre, which was actually on Lawn Street across the road. There's a doorway that used to go up to Pizza Pizza, now goes up to a Korean restaurant. And this is where Montmartre was. And when I saw this photo in the Reichenberg collection, it really struck me how the history of venues is all around us. Also the Roger Watkins book where he has a map of Auckland venues. I thought, oh, there must be more than that. And it'd be great to do an online one where you're able to click around a lot more. The other reason why it seemed important to do now, obviously, is that the knowledge of these venues, especially the ones from the 50s, is going to be lost as the people who are active in that scene have more trouble remembering it or are lost to us, of course. So I thought I'd start by talking about what I mean by venue. I mean, obviously, when I first started this project, I was going to go right back to the 1900s, but I really struck against the fact that cinemas used to have orchestras before talkies, so are they music venues? And every hall, I mean, am I going to put every hall across the country? Because they were all music venues. So that's kind of why I started in the 40s and avoided that silent film era. And I have kind of avoided community halls to some degree, unless they were very regular kind of venues, just to try and restrict what I'm talking about. Though obviously you can see they had a rich kind of culture in the RSAs and venues. I mean, there's some amazing photos on the Reichenberg collection. So first I thought I'd talk about how I actually researched it. Obviously I got some support from Auckland Libraries to come and look at their collection. And so the Auckland Star listings was one of my main places that I found. They're on Microfiche over there. Every day of the week they had venue listings. This is one from the early 60s, but right the way back, even on Papers Past, you can see some great listings. You know, on Papers Past, you see these places like Druids Hall, and you're like, I've never heard of that. But of course, Druids Hall is Galatos now. So it's a venue that's been going that whole time. So the history's right there. Some of these ones, you know, the orange, the building's still there on Newton, and so forth. The other things I looked at, of course, I had help with Annette with the ephemera collection, which includes lots of restaurant menus, because restaurants had music, and just other little gig guides and maps and things that had venues listed on them. Another big one was the directories, which is like the early kind of white pages. I don't think there's anyone young enough that won't know what a white pages is, but one day we'll have to explain that to them, I'm sure. The directories, the thing I struggled with them was finding the terminology. I mean, I was very naive when I went into it and I started looking at pub. I mean, everyone played at a pub, surely, like they do now. It's like, no one did. Taverns, no help. Cafes, oh, nothing under cafes. Of course, cafes, coffee lounges, cabarets, so I had to kind of get my head around what I was even looking at. So that was the first kind of realization. The other realization was just the changing nature of Auckland itself. I mean, if you look at this map, anyone want to have a guess at what the problem is that I immediately struck? Well, this Cook Street, I don't know if you know about Cook Street, but it turns into Merrill Drive and goes on a big loop now. So you might have a venue like Ace of Clubs here. This is standing at Aotea Square, kind of, looking up towards the police station. And there's Cook Street along there, which Ace of Clubs is on, where they had the Cook Street markets. All gone, so good luck. So I just had to sort of put the Ace of Clubs somewhere, roughly where it was. Other problem area? Any guesses? Down the bottom of town?
There was all the sea there.
Wow, very early, yeah. Fortunately, I didn't start that early, but down here is the problem, Little Queen Street. When I read about Little Queen Street, I was like, oh, Little Queen Street is just the bottom of Queen Street, surely. But then I actually looked at a photo. Oh no, look at where the ferry building is. That's not Little Queen Street was right where the downtown shopping centre was, right in the middle. And they had venues like the Galaxy down here in the corner. It's a famous 60s venue. So obviously, downtown centre, now a new Britomart development. So the other thing I wanted was photos for the, so I wanted every venue to have a photo to go with it of some sort, even if it was just a gig listing. Fortunately, at the same time as I was doing my research here, the library got 900 boxes of film from John Reichenberg, who was a photographer who started in 1958. He and his wife, who's second from the left there, Wendy, they both just took photos around bars as a nighttime job, and because it was obviously pre-selfies, so people, they'd take photos and say, do you want a photo of this later? And so it was really a way of people recording their night. So then they'd have to ring up on Monday and go, oh, can I get that photo from Saturday night at the Crystal Palace or whatever? The trouble with this collection is that it's all in these boxes. As you can see underneath the photo, it's just raw film rolled up into different squares of cardboard. 900 boxes. Wendy, fortunately, still with us, she wrote very brief notes on the top of each of them. So she might say, you know, this is a venue and there's entertainers. So good luck, especially if you're looking for a particular entertainer. So what I did was I went downstairs with a light box and a pair of gloves and a microscope and my phone, and I went through the ones that seemed interesting. I rolled them out on the white box by hand and scrolled through the ones that looked interesting for a couple of weeks. And I didn't get through anywhere near all of them. What I was able to do was there's some photos, some apps now where you can take a photo of a negative and it turns into a photo. So some of the photos I actually will use tonight will be just ones I digitized like that on my phone. The other thing I wanted to do as part of the project was identify the musicians as I went along. This lady was on a photo, her playing with the Playdates, this band of Polynesian and Maori dudes at Picasso that was used for a lot of advertising. And she was one in particular. She plays clarinet, she sings, she plays bongos. So it's people like this, especially the female musicians, because they often just filled in as a singer for a band. And so you couldn't really find out who they were. So a lot of their names were lost. So I set up a whole page on the Audio Culture website, which is a music history website that I did a lot of this work for, audioculture.co.nz. And so I got people to contribute saying who they thought the people were. There's quite a few still unidentified on there, but fortunately, 3 months later, someone did tell me that this was Faith Smith, aka Bongo Faith, who was a cool young lass around town in the mid-60s. So I'm just going to go through some of the venues now just to discuss the scene in the 50s and 60s mainly, because that's where the heart of the Reichenberg collection is. So I was looking for a photo of the Shira Lee, which was the same as the Galaxy, which is down the bottom of town. That photo I started of Little Queen Street. This is the venue that was there before, the Shira Lee. So I just picked one photo, but it shows the depth of the Reichenberg collection, that this random photo of a bunch of people on a night out is actually Max Merritt and the Meteors just hanging out with their girlfriends. So you never know. I mean, there's just some crazy stuff out there. That's Max on the far left. This is one of the ones I scanned on my phone, just to give you an idea of what the Shirley was like. You know, a small stage, the audience is almost there, lots of people smoking cigarettes. One of the people interviewed for audio history was telling me he was just surprised how many of these photos didn't have cigarette smoke in them, given how cloudy the venues were back then. Any guesses of where this one is? Still there on Mount Eden Road. Crystal Palace. So when I read about the Crystal Palace, I thought, oh, it must be the cinema, because that's where they had venues recently. But of course, again, I was wrong. This door that goes downstairs to the lab recording studio now is actually where all the gigs were, down under the ground. People dancing, you can see, in the old dance hall style. Each person has a partner, you know, and they're dancing to Merv Thomas and the Dixielanders. Johnny Devlin played there, Howard Morrison Quartet. So it's a great spot, and it was run by Phil Warren, who ran a lot of these venues and went on to be deputy mayor in the 80s when he got so sick of the alcohol licensing laws that he got into politics. So there he is on the tiny stage they had there. So later, up the road, he started a new venue at the top of Simon Street. Anyone hazard a guess at this one? Oh, yes, it's Ray Columbus and the Invaders. What venue do you think they're playing at? Yes, the Oriental Ballroom. So this was a hall that used to be a cinema that was given to the Chinese community so they could show Chinese films only. They weren't allowed to show mainstream films, and they could have Chinese events. But Phil Warren said, oh, what are you doing with it on Saturday nights? He had these massive dance parties where he'd, you know, for example, he had like a beach one where he put sand on the floor and everyone played in like swimming costumes with fake like palm trees and so forth. This is Max Merritt and the Meteors, who we saw in that earlier photo. Great suits, aren't they? Look at those suits they've got on. Matching suits. And this is the crowd at the Oriental, so it's quite a big place. You know, I thought this was the town hall when I was first looking at it, and then the stage was just too small. You can see some great haircuts there. What difference do you notice between this and the Crystal Palace, though? No partners. It's rock and roll has come at 64. It's 5 years later, and the party started for the teenagers anyway. To be honest, the older people were still dancing with partners. It all just happened at the same time, but yeah, the rock and roll era. Though weirdly, unlike today, you can see in some of the other photos, they weren't all staring at the band. There was like a good 4-meter gap between the audience and the band. Everyone's more interested in partying and socializing. You've got two of the best bands in the country. People are hardly looking at them. So there's also another scene at the same time, the kind of restaurant scene. Anyone hazard a guess at this one? Huh? No, it's a long gone restaurant. Like the close. This is actually the High Diddle Griddle up on K Road. The music we were... High Diddle Griddle. The music we're listening to at the very start where they introduced the band was actually recorded at the High Diddle Griddle. Anna Hoffman, who was a bit of a troublemaker around town, described it thusly. The High Diddle Griddle had a waterfall in rock decor with black velvet drapes painted by Christine Zambuca. There were enormous murals depicting the idyllic Polynesian scenes with svelte maidens and dusky, handsome guys set in a paradise of flowers. Vora Kissin used to perform there full-time before she went to America and became famous, and so on. So yeah, they had a restaurant scene. You'd have dinner, and after dinner you'd have a little dance. This went right across the city. This is basically out beyond Green Bay. There's now a retirement village called Pine Song. There used to be a venue called Pine Song. It was a big restaurant out there. This is a magician. They had bands. And the Sorrento was another one, which is by One Tree Hill. The interesting thing about the Sorrento was, like I was telling you before, how John Reichenberg kind of worked as the selfies of the day. To make it faster so they could sell people photos, they actually set up a printing studio in the basement of the Sorrento so they could print your photo on the night and sell it. That's Wendy printing photos so you could take them home with you. Now, there was another scene, a later, racier scene for the adults. Anyone want to have a guess where this is in town? Colony, yes. There's Ricky May. This is getting a bit late night. What's that bottle on the table? Not allowed in those days, but there's a great story actually Billy Farnell tells in an audio recording he did for the libraries. I think it was at La Boheme, where the police came and he quickly got all the bottles of alcohol and put them on the dumb waiter and put it between floors. He got caught. And here's Bob Sell, who ran the Colony in La Boheme. And there at the back is Billy Farnell, who I was telling you about, who plays every Friday night up at Shanghai Lils to this day. He's playing the piano in the background there. He actually features in a story I'll tell you a bit later. This one's a weird venue, so I'm moving more to the coffee lounge scene now. I found this really weird. They've got egg cartons behind the stage and these weird stalactite things up the top. No one recognises it. It's the Bel Air Coffee Lounge. It was directly across the Auckland Town Hall. So you can see the floors like just linoleum. It's more of a dance kind of venue. So another of the audio recordings they have is by Bruce. Well, they have a few musicians, Bruce King, Dave Williamson, gave interviews to Auckland Libraries, and so they have these on recording. He said, a lot of the venues in the Reichenberg photos, like the Picasso, the Bel Air, the Montmartre, I was married straight out of school. I didn't frequent these places of ill repute. Respectable people went to the Colony because it was a cabaret, but the coffee club crowd, the Picasso crowd, the Montmartre, this was the lower end, the seedy part of music, the jazz end. Though I did visit Montmartre occasionally because I admired Mike Walker's trio there. So this one, took forever to find the name of this one, but it was weirdly obvious if you look at the pictures in the background there. What have we got there? Some angels. See Heaven and Hell. There's Bill, what's his name? Bill Rafferty up the back there. He's in the Quintickies. So this is this is another one where I just haven't even quite located it still. I put it on the map where it was in the Roger Watkins book. But then I was in this long discussion online with these two old musicians who were like, no, it was round the corner. No, it was up a bit. And then they were arguing with each other. So, and I was like, well, I've got it here. Roger Watkins said it was here. It's like, oh, no, I don't think that's right. So, yeah, we're struggling against the memories. This one's a more well-known one. This is another one where it was right where Cook Street was. Does anyone hazard a guess? Picasso. Yes, the Picasso. Very good. So yeah, this is the Playdates, the band that Bongo Faith played with. So Picasso was another weird one though, because in Roger Watkins' book he actually has it in two places, Picasso 1 and Picasso 2, right across the road from each other. So trying to ask people, to cast their mind back 70 years, which of these photos is of the first Picasso and which is the second one? Good luck. So yeah, that's Picasso Coffee Lounge. Dave Williamson in his audio interview with the library said, I think if you added rum to their Coke and coffee, I wasn't aware of any grass being smoked inside, but it was always so choked with cigarette smoke it was too hard to tell. It was a smallish, dark place, often with really rough types, mixed with the normal audience. Overseas and local sailors used to come in late after being at parties. They'd often start fights with the locals, and mostly lost. So yeah, these are two photos I think that are at the Picasso. This one is in a corner. There is the rock wall there. This one, the stage is set up right in the middle. Still looks underground. There's little hints of rocks. It's like, did they just have two stages in one of the locations of this venue, or are these two separate ones? Leo Sleeman, who's over on the left there, also did an interview with the Auckland Libraries. He's one of those three that did an audio recording, which I used as research. Too much coffee? Yeah, so I think they weren't just having coffees all night long. Yeah, actually, there's a story Billy Farnell tells where also they used to have bottles on the table and then if the police came in, they just quickly put flowers in the bottles of wine to cover it up. So this one thing, when I was doing these talks, I met with Max Cryer, who's on the Heritage Trust, and he was really insistent that I try and get venues that didn't have microphones. He could see that I'd be a modern sort of person and not really think of places where people just sang to a whole room with no amplification. So I did try quite hard to find some of those places. This is a very famous one on Queen Street. His Majesty's Theatre. This is the most tragic one, though, as well, because, there's actually a better black and white photo. It was a little, I couldn't get a good version of it, where the motif above the stage was even more amazing when it first started in the 20s. And they had like big split ends concerts here in the 70s. And then in the 80s, a developer bought it and they wanted to do something with the block. So they just left the cinema, this theatre, for years on end till it started to fall apart, and they petitioned to the council, it's too run down to fix. And so everyone complained, don't pull it down. And so what they did, they waited till Christmas one year, and between Christmas and New Year's, they pulled it down. So yeah, that was down the bottom of Queen Street. This is another one where I'm not completely sure, but have a pretty good idea. Just did a wild guess if anyone's got a guess what this venue might be. Well, I think it's the Polynesian Club, which is Bernie Allen. Is that the right name? Yeah, Bernie Allen seemed to agree with me that it probably was. This is a spot that was sort of where Beresford Square is off Pitt Street. He used to go in upstairs. And basically, Bernie said all the musicians would play their gigs for the night, playing nice dance music somewhere. And then they'd go to the Polynesian Club and jam till the early hours. They'd have a bottle of alcohol in their car, and they'd go out and come back with forwards drinking. He does recall, because it was upstairs, one time someone went and had a drink of alcohol. They came back into the band on the stage, and they said, there's blood all over the staircase. We've got to get out of here now. There's people yelling and screaming. So the whole band took their instruments, climbed out the window, over the awning, and then handed their instruments down to each other as they jumped down over the awning. Sure enough, it turned out someone had been murdered. The fights between the sailors doing the Polynesian routes and the American armed service often used to have fights there. And so, yeah, someone was killed. I did want to read out something about Polynesian Club, actually. I have one more reading. This is Anna Hoffman again. The Polynesian dance hall, known as the Poly, was a large, dimly lit, low room with a low ceiling at the end of a long, dark passage. The dance floor was packed. Young men with ducktail or DA hairdos wearing stovepipe trousers were jive dancing with girls dressed in full skirts and blouses, just like mine. They spun around, displaying layers of petticoats, their ponytails flying free. This was the time of teddy boys, teenage delinquents, and the Mazengarb report. How exciting it was. Not at all like the church dances or those in the Papatoi town hall that I was used to. The bright rhythmic pulse of the music made my thighs tingle. As my eyes accustomed to the dim red light, I saw Billy Farnell playing at the piano. He smiled and raised his hand high in a wave without missing a beat. He was wearing rings on every finger, and I could have sworn he had on makeup. There was a girl standing near the piano dressed in a low-cut, off-the-shoulder peasant blouse, and a brightly printed skirt resting on layers of stiff net petticoats. She was singing into a microphone. So that gives you a little picture of the sort of cool late night parties they had there. Here's Maury Chan in the 60s playing at this venue. They're still on Spotify if you want to listen to some quite cool instrumental numbers with slide guitar. The interesting thing, where this venue was, there's a venue now called New Samoa House, which they actually have had some gigs at. And you enter from K Road, but it's basically in the same spot. But Old Samoa House was built in 72, 73. So another mystery is it seems like Old Samoa House was built to replace this venue that was almost in the same spot, but I've never quite got to the bottom of that yet. So what I've been doing recently is moving into the 70s more. And it's been interesting to see how places progressed over that time. So for example, these two photos on the right were both taken at the same venue 8 years apart, basically. Oh, no, a bit more. Must be 13 years apart, I guess. So this top 20 club up the top, on the back of Durham Lane, or Durham Street East. Top 20 Club, if you don't know, was a place where the band of the day would just play all the songs in the top 20.
Jared, was that the one where Radio Hauraki actually had a venue?
Yeah, they did. They had the 1800 or something like that. 1480. 1480.
That's right. Yes, I remember.
It was also the spot where Grannies and Grandpas was, which was run by a local musician, Tommy Adderley, thank you. And he did a cunning thing, was Grandpa's was upstairs and you got a membership card, and he said that meant that it was a private club so they could have alcohol, so it was just a way to get around the alcohol laws of the time. It was a cool place where Keith Richards, after their gig, came round and had a jam there. But that's Larry Morris playing there at the top. But of course, then it just kind of ran into decay after Tommy Adderley was actually arrested and had possessions taken off him for skirting the alcohol laws in that way. So it was in disrepair for a little while, and after a year of disrepair, they set up Punk Club's Wines there in 78. It's the Idol Idols. So it just kind of shows how far we've come. Downstairs, unfortunately, was Babe's Disco. So the disco kids and the punk kids didn't get along. Quite a few fights. And on the left there is Las Vegas, which is up on K Road. So that was in the 70s, but it's still, is it there even? It was there till recently. So the other thing about the Reichenberg collection, of course, is that after I did my research down there, I asked for a few boxes, I think 5 boxes, to be digitized. So I managed to get some of the issues I thought most crucial, like that very first one, the Maori Community Centre. There's so few photos of it. Those early ones of Howard Morrison and Johnny Devlin. But there's so much more in there, but there's just so much of it. If they digitize one of those boxes a week, it would just take 18 years or something to digitize them all. But these are ones I scanned on my phone, and it just kind of shows what you can just sort of randomly come across. That one on the top right, I think, is Picasso Coffee Lounge. I'm not even sure. It just sort of speaks volumes, doesn't it? This odd photo. Don't know who the people are. Bottom right is the Kinney Quartet, which was the father of Severe, DJ Severe, Phil Bell, who's a famous radio personality DJ. And over the right is any guesses? Sort of.
Mr. Lee Grant.
Yep, Mr. Lee Grant. And where's he playing? Can you read that? Station Hotel. He's got the Station Hotel Quartet. So that was up on, I'm not even sure, it's kind of that side of town. Yeah, so it just, Anzac, right. So it just shows how much stuff's still down there. You know, I probably couldn't recognize a lot of the people that were probably amazing kind of people. I'd really encourage Auckland Libraries to keep digitising those first years, at least 58, 59, especially the ones that John Reichenberg and Wendy themselves did, because if we don't ask people now who are in those photos, we will never know. So what I did with it, if I've got time, I might show you the real maps, but basically this is a photo of the 50s map. So this shows you an example. You don't have to be able to read it, but just to give you an idea of what I did for each venue, a photograph, a little description. Did my best to label who was in the photo, and a read more where you can click through to an article on audio culture, sometimes about the venue, more often just about one of the people who played at that venue regularly to give you a sense of what went on there. So in the 50s, to start with, the 40s is actually quite amazing because you still had the end of quite a wild time. We had the Bethel's Caves and stuff used to be used for venues and as a venue in the 20s and 30s. And so they actually put a dance floor down in the cave. People would come by ferry and spend the night there, and then they could just drink as much as they wanted because the police weren't going to drive all the way out to, is it Bethel's? Whaipu, thank you. Whaipu Cave. And then in the 50s, things are starting to congregate a little bit more in the city, but you can see there's actually kind of venues everywhere, and given that I haven't included too many halls and so forth, you can see that it's kind of spread throughout the city. If you lived in Papatoe, you weren't going to come into town for a dance, not in those days. And so you'd have places like the one out at Mission Bay and so forth, and all around the city or out at the Waitaks. This is obviously Point Chef Sailing Club. Before that, they'd actually had the Dixieland 2 there right on the beach. So they had some amazing venues right out in the suburbs, sort of. So yeah, this is the 60s. You can see the centre city is just getting clogged with coffee lounges. It's kind of amazing just how many little places sprouted up. This is Dutch Kiwi. So there's more sort of restaurant, dine and dance type places out in the suburbs. Though up on the beach, was it 50s and 60s? They still had the pirate ship on the beach in one of my early maps. I think it might have been 40s map actually.
No, that went in 57, but you've got Surfside up there.
Yeah, Surfside.
Further along in Norfolk.
Maybe we'll click through the map. My memory's not very good. But yeah, you just see how much is building up. And then in the 70s, that's actually a photo from the 80s, so it's probably jumping forward. But what you start seeing is when you click around the 70s map, you get this real sense of the changing times, because on one hand, you had Arthur Skelton's orchestra was still playing at the Orange, and they first started at the Sailing Club. Arthur Skelton's orchestra started there in 49 at the Ponsonby Sailing Club, which was kind of under the Harbour Bridge, really. So he was still playing in the 70s at the Orange, that people were still dancing. And then at the same time, you had a lot more African-American music, reggae coming through in Ponsonby. Cleopatra's had like soul and funk, and so forth. That's Max Cryer, who's on the Libraries Trust. So I thought I'd just put that photo up. I digitized it myself on the phone, so it's not so hot. But yeah, I had a couple of coffees with Max to talk through. So I just want to thank the Auckland Libraries Heritage Trust for their support on the project. Basically, I did some stories on audio culture, did one on the spin-off, where you can see some more. If you search my name in Reichenberg, you'll probably bring up quite a few stories. Okay, Cool. Well, have a look online. Yeah, as I say, if my name, garethshute@gmail, if you have any comments, or the Audio Culture Facebook page. Yeah, do check it out. Thanks.